Let's be honest, we've all splurged on stuff we didn't really need. At some point, every shooter, collector, or hobbyist falls into the trap of grabbing gear or guns that seem cool at the time but serve little real-world purpose. Whether it's out of curiosity, nostalgia, or just wanting something flashy, we've all got that pile of gear collecting dust in a closet, a garage, or maybe even sitting in a gun safe. Occasionally, we pass that stuff on to a buddy or relative who actually finds a way to put it to use. Other times, usually when the bills pile up or we're relocating and can't justify the weight or shipping cost, we're forced to offload a few things we never planned to sell. Now, if you're anything like me, a seasoned firearms guy who's logged range time from rimfire plinking with .22 long rifle to punching steel with .45 auto, you know parting ways with a beloved piece is never easy. Especially when it's one of your prized handguns. Selling a gun is usually a last resort. But sometimes life doesn't leave you much choice. That said, if you're sitting on a rare or historically significant firearm, don't sell it unless you absolutely have to. A lot of these classics climb in value like crazy. Give it 10 or 15 years, and what was once a few $100 could be worth tens of thousands. So, let's talk about the top 5 handguns you should never let go of. Starting with a true legend, Colt Single Action Army. Back in July of 1873, the U.S. Army officially adopted what we now know as the Colt Single Action Army, designating it the Model 1873. The military ordered 36,000 revolvers chambered for a new round purpose-built for it, the .45 Colt, not .45, but the real-deal cowboy round. Just a couple months after the Army put it into service, Colt released it to the civilian market under a nickname every serious collector knows, the Peacemaker. By 1878, Colt expanded the lineup, offering the Peacemaker in 44-40, 38-40, and 32-20 Winchester, the exact same cartridges used in the Winchester Model 1873 lever-action rifle. That was a game-changer. Folks on the frontier loved the idea of having both a rifle and a revolver chambered in the same round, practical, efficient, and deadly reliable. Colt saw the opportunity and rebranded the Single Action Army as the Frontier 6-shooter, pricing it at $17.50 apiece. Between 1873 and 1941, Colt sold well over 357,000 of these revolvers in various calibers. The original model, firing a 254 grain, .454 caliber projectile, could reach muzzle velocities of up to 1,150 feet per second, incredibly potent for the time, and frankly still impressive today. Everyone from U.S. soldiers to cowboys, settlers, and even Native American warriors relied on the Colt SA across the rugged American West. Though the military moved on to the Colt Model 1892, a double-action revolver, the Single Action Army stuck around thanks to its sheer stopping power. It saw continued service in skirmishes like the Spanish-American War, the Philippine-American conflict, and the U.S. Mexico border wars of the early 1900s. Even long after it was officially phased out, the Colt Single Action Army held a place of honor. None other than General George S. Patton carried one as his personal sidearm during World War II, a throwback to an earlier era of American grit and firepower. Then, when westerns stormed American pop culture in the 1950s, Colt revived the revolver in 1955, pricing it at $125, a steep jump from its original cost. Today, vintage Colts from the 19th century, especially original Model 1873s, are holy grail items for collectors. How much can one go for? In May of 1987, the New York Times reported that an authentic M1873 Colt Single Action Army was sold for a staggering $242,000. Adjusted for inflation, that same gun would now be worth around $566,000. That's no exaggeration, these aren't just guns, they're pieces of American history. Pre-2020 Colt Python. Ask any seasoned shooter or collector worth their salt, and they'll tell you the Colt Python. The original run, not the reboot, is one of the most iconic wheelguns ever made. Sure, it had its quirks and came with a hefty price tag, but what you got in return was craftsmanship that's almost unheard of today. When Colt dropped the Python back in the day, it wasn't just another .357 Magnum. This thing was designed from the ground up to be a high-end, precision-built revolver for serious target shooters. Every single piece of the original Python was meticulously crafted. Hand-fitted internals, an ultra-smooth trigger, that legendary ventilated rib barrel, and of course, the mirror-polished royal blue finish that put lesser revolvers to shame. It wasn't just a firearm, it was a statement. And as soon as it hit the market, shooters and collectors took notice. Over the decades, the Python carved out its spot as a top-tier .357 Magnum revolver. But here's the kicker, because of how much manual labor it took to build one, Colt just couldn't keep up with the cost. they eventually had to price it so high that it stopped being profitable. Combine that with the rise of lightweight, high-capacity polymer-framed pistols in 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, and 45 ACP, and Colt had no choice but to end production in 2005. For over a decade, the original Python skyrocketed in value. Before Colt brought out the modern version in 2020, mint-condition examples of the classic Python were selling for an average of $3,800, with some early models topping $10,000 depending on the condition and serial number. Even though the release of the new Python cooled the market a little, there's still a strong demand from purist collectors who see the originals as unmatched in both fit and finish. And with CZ acquiring Colt in May of last year, some folks in the community are already calling the new ones the CZ Python. As production on this updated version ramps up, the pre-CZ Pythons, especially the old-school models from before 2005, are only going to get harder to find in pristine shape. If you've got one in your collection, especially a clean shooter or an unfired safe queen, do yourself a favor, don't sell it. That kind of quality just doesn't come around anymore. FN Browning High Power T-Series. First released in 1935, the Browning High Power, or High Power, depending on who you ask, is one of the most influential double-stack semi-automatic pistols of the last 100 years. It was way ahead of its time, boasting a 13-round magazine capacity when most pistols could barely manage half that. The story behind its design is as legendary as the pistol itself. Belgian Arms giant Fabrique Nationale Herstel, or just FN to those of us in the know, tapped the legendary John Moses Browning to create a sidearm for the French military. The only problem? Colt already held the rights to his 1911, so Browning had to go back to the drawing board. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1926, leaving the job unfinished. That's when FN's top designer, Dieudonné Save, stepped in and completed the project. After several revisions and refinements, the final version, a 9mm semi-auto with a double-stack mag, was born. The Belgian army adopted it that same year, and soon, militaries around the world followed suit. It became a staple on battlefields and in holsters for law enforcement across multiple continents. Among the most sought-after variants today are the T-Series High Powers, named for the T prefix in their serial numbers. Built between the end of World War II and 1973, these pistols are widely considered the finest examples of the platform. They featured superior machining, flawless bluing, and were the first models to introduce the external extractor, which is not only more reliable but also easier to maintain than the internal type found in earlier versions. Depending on condition, T-Series examples can still fetch upwards of $3,000, especially if they come with the original box and paperwork. And even though FN ended production in 2021, interest in the high power hasn't slowed down. Companies like Springfield Armory and Gerson have since released their own versions, the SA-35 and MCP-35, respectively, which helped reignite enthusiasm among shooters and collectors alike. FN themselves jumped back in earlier this year with a modernized version called the FN High Power, bringing the classic design into the 21st century. Still, none of these reproductions quite capture the vintage charm and flawless craftsmanship of a true Belgian-made T-Series. If you've got one sitting in your safe, especially in excellent condition, trust me, it's not the kind of piece you want to let go of. Pre-World War I M1911 and Pre-World War II M1911A1. Let's be real. If you've ever picked up a handgun or even just strolled through a gun show, you've seen a 1911. It's arguably the most iconic American sidearm of all time. But what most folks don't realize is just how deep the roots go. We're not gonna dig too deep here, this pistol deserves its own video, but here's a quick rundown. The Colt Model 1911 was officially adopted by the US military in, you guessed it, 1911. It was the result of years of work by John Moses Browning, who was perfecting the idea of a magazine-fed, autoloading pistol. Before the 1911 came along, the Army was issuing the Colt Model 1892, which fired the .38 long Colt. Now, that round had lower recoil and worked fine in theory, but in combat? Not so much. Fast forward to the Philippine-American conflict. U.S. Troops fighting in the southern islands, especially against the Moro warriors, found the .38 long Colt downright ineffective. The Army knew they needed something heavier hitting. They issued a challenge to firearms manufacturers: build a semi-auto handgun that could deliver true .45 caliber stopping power. Colt submitted Browning's design. It proved rugged, reliable, and it crushed the competition. Over 100 years later, the 45 ACP version of the 1911 is still going strong, even in a world dominated by polymer frame, high-capacity 9s. You can snag a decent mil-spec version for under $300 from manufacturers in Turkey or the Philippines. But not all 1911s are created equal. If you've got your hands on a pre-World War I Colt M1911, or an early pre-World War II M1911A1, especially in original condition, you're sitting on a valuable piece of history. Prices range from $2,000 to $5,000, depending on condition, finish, and provenance. And then there's the Holy Grail, the Singer-manufactured M1911A1. In 1941, the U.S. Army had the Singer Sewing Machine Company build just 500 units. All were reportedly issued to the Army Air Corps, and because of high casualty rates among airmen, very few of those pistols made it home. That makes the Singer 1911A1 one of the rarest, most valuable handguns on the planet. One example sold just a couple of years ago for over $400,000. And with prices like that, don't be shocked if one of these cracks the $1 million mark in the next decade. If you inherited one from your grandfather or great-grandfather, don't even think about selling it right now. Lock it up, insure it, and give it 10 more years, you'll thank yourself. Pre-World War II and Wartime Walther P38. Let's shift gears and head across the pond. Before the outbreak of the Second World War, the German Army was using the P08 Luger, which had replaced the Mauser C96 as their go-to sidearm. The Luger was sleek, reliable, and famously German. But it was also expensive and complex to produce. So by the late 1930s, Germany was looking for a more cost-effective service pistol, one that could handle military duty without breaking the bank. Enter the Walther P38. In 1938, Walther introduced a groundbreaking new design built from the ground up as a military pistol. Chambered in 9mm, the P38 introduced features that were way ahead of their time. A double-action/single-action trigger, external slide-mounted safety, open-top slide, and easy takedown for field maintenance. It was compact, durable, and extremely field-friendly, a serious workhorse of a combat pistol. The P38 performed so well that it stayed in service with the German military, in one form or another, all the way through to the 1990s. Its alloy-framed descendant, the P1, stuck around until 1994, when it was finally replaced by the Heckler & Koch USP, rebranded by the Bundeswehr as the P8. Now, if you've got a pre-World War II P38, or even one from wartime production, you're holding a very collectible piece. Early models from 1938 have the Walther banner logo stamped on the slide, super collectible. During the war, Walther began marking pistols with coded stamps to obscure factory origins from the Allies. You'll find wartime P38s with markings like AC, Walther, BYF, Mauser, and CYQ, Spreework. Collectors go crazy for these, especially the early AC-marked P38s with no date, which are among the rarest and can fetch anywhere between $8,500 to $11,000, depending on condition and original parts. If you own one of those pistols, keep it well preserved and out of the elements. Give it another decade, and you'll likely see its value climb even higher. In a market full of plastic fantastics and striker-fired clones, and all steel, wartime German service pistol stands out like a Rolls-Royce among rental cars. And that wraps up my list of 5 handguns you should absolutely never sell. Whether it's for their historical significance, craftsmanship, or skyrocketing collector value, these pistols are more than just tools, they're investments, and more importantly, legacy pieces. Got another pistol you think deserves a spot on this list? Drop a comment down below and let me know. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and keep your powder dry.